The Galactic Academy floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal flower. It was built on Station Orion 7, far from any planet, and it was home to students from 43 different species. Young beings came here from across the galaxy to learn, to grow, and to prepare for their futures among the stars. In Classroom 9C, the morning light from the artificial sun filtered through the wide windows. 20 students sat at their desks, and among them the humans were easy to spot. They were the smallest, the softest, and the weakest-looking of all the species present. Sat in the back corner of the room. She was 17 years old, with long black hair that she kept tied in a simple ponytail. Her eyes were dark and calm, and she rarely spoke unless someone asked her a direct question. Even then, her answers were short. She preferred to watch and listen. The students sat in the front rows. They were tall and powerful, standing over 2 meters high, with 4 muscular arms and skin that looked like blue crystal. When they moved, their bodies caught the light and sparkled. They were proud creatures, and they knew they were stronger than almost everyone else in the room. Was the biggest in the class. She had won every physical competition for 3 years straight. When she laughed, the sound was like rocks grinding together. She often looked at the human students with something between pity and amusement. They were different. They were insect-like beings, each about the size of a human child, but they never came alone. Was their swarm leader, and where went, 11 other followed. They shared one mind between them, thinking and moving as a single unit. Their black shells clicked when they communicated, making sounds that the translator devices turned into words. There were other species too. There were blob-like creatures that could change their shape, that had fur and sharp teeth. The glassmen were exactly what their name suggested, beings made of living glass that chimed when they walked. And then there were the humans, just 3 of them in the whole class. Was older brother. He was 18, loud, and always looking for a challenge. He had broad shoulders and a quick smile, and he never seemed to understand that he was outmatched. Every week he challenged to arm wrestling. Every week she defeated him in seconds, but he always came back, laughing and promising to win next time. Was their friend. He was quiet-like, but in a nervous way rather than a calm one. He wore thick glasses and spent most of his time with computers and machines. He was the class technology assistant, which meant he helped the teacher with displays and recordings. The other students mostly ignored him. Their teacher was a named instructor, looked like a pile of green jelly with eyes, and when spoke, the whole body rippled with each word. Was patient and kind, but even seemed to forget about most of the time. The other students called the ghost. She moved quietly, sat quietly, and never drew attention to herself. During group activities, she did her part without complaint. During discussions, she listened but rarely added her thoughts. Some students wondered if she was slow or stupid. Others simply forgot she existed. But was always watching, always thinking. In her notebook, she drew things that nobody else noticed. She drew the layout of the classroom, marking every desk, every door, every window. She drew the hallways outside, noting which paths led where. She drew her classmates too, not their faces but their habits, which ones were fast, which ones were strong, which ones panicked under pressure. Nobody asked to see her notebook. Nobody cared what the quiet human girl was doing. On this particular morning, instructor had an announcement to make. The gelatinous body quivered with excitement as projected the information onto the main display. Students said, "The annual tactical simulation exams are approaching. As you know, this is one of the most important events of the school year. Teams will be formed, scenarios will be created, and the winning class will receive the highest honors." The students straightened with pride. They clicked rapidly among themselves. Even the glassmen chimed with interest. Class 9C has never won this competition, continued, but perhaps this year will be different. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. We would win easily if we didn't have to carry the humans. Some students laughed, others looked uncomfortable. Smile faded, but only for a moment. "Hey," he said, "we're not that bad." "Humans have ranked last for 12 years, said the swarm, speaking in perfect unison. "This is not opinion, this is fact. Your species lacks physical ability. You lack mental coordination. You lack natural weapons." "We have our own strengths," said quietly, but his voice was too soft and nobody heard him. Said nothing. She simply turned to a new page in her notebook and began to draw the main display, noting the schedule of the exams and the types of scenarios that would be tested. After class, caught up with his sister in the hallway. His earlier confidence had returned, and he walked with his usual energy. "Don't let them get to you," he said. "They're just showing off." "I know," replied. "We'll prove them wrong somehow, you'll see." Looked at her brother. She loved him, but she also knew that he didn't understand. The aliens weren't just showing off. They genuinely believed that humans were inferior, and in many ways they were right. Humans couldn't match the in strength. They couldn't match the in coordination. They couldn't match any species in any obvious way. But had been studying human history since she was a child. She knew something that the aliens didn't understand. Humans had never been the strongest creatures on their home planet. They had never been the fastest or the deadliest. Earth was what the galaxy called a death world, a planet where everything tried to kill you. And yet humans had survived. They had thrived. They had conquered their world and reached for the stars. How? By being clever, by being patient, by turning every disadvantage into an advantage. Closed her notebook and looked out the window at the stars. "We'll see," she said softly. Somewhere in the distance, a ship was approaching the station. Its markings were hidden, its intentions unknown, and on that ship 12 warriors were preparing for a hunt. The quiet human girl had no way of knowing that her skills would soon be tested. She had no way of knowing that everything she had learned, everything she had observed, would become the only thing standing between her classmates and a terrible fate. But she would be ready. She was always ready. The day started like any other day at the Galactic Academy. Students filled the hallways, talking and laughing. Teachers prepared their lessons. The artificial sun brightened slowly, mimicking the morning of a planet that most students had never seen. In classroom 9C, instructor was explaining the principles of interstellar navigation. The lesson was dry and many students were struggling to stay awake. Was doodling on her desk with one of her 4 hands. The swarm was completely still, which meant they were either paying perfect attention or completely ignoring the lesson. Was trying not to yawn. Was drawing in her notebook. Today she was mapping the emergency exits on this floor. She had already mapped the floors above and below. It was a habit she had developed years ago, and she never stopped to ask herself why she did it. It just felt important. Third period arrived, and with it came the end of navigation class. Students began to relax, preparing for the short break before the next lesson. Then the alarms began to scream. The sound was loud and sharp, like the cry of a wounded animal. Red emergency lights began to flash, painting the classroom in the color of blood. Every student froze. Instructor's body trembled and rippled with fear. "Everyone stay calm," said, but even the teacher's voice was shaking. "This is probably just a drill." It was not a drill. The station's announcement system crackled to life. A cold, mechanical voice spoke words that nobody wanted to hear. "Attention all personnel. Security breach detected. Hostile vessels approaching. All students and non-combat staff proceed to designated safe zones immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Chaos erupted in the classroom. Students jumped from their seats. They demanded answers. The swarm scattered and reformed, clicking frantically. The glassman chimed with high-pitched sounds of distress. Remained in her seat. Her heart was beating fast, but her mind was calm. She looked at the door, then at the windows, then at her notebook. She began to calculate. "We need to move," shouted. "We need to get to the safe zones." Instructor tried to open the classroom door. The panel flashed red. "The lockdown protocols have sealed us in," said. "The door won't respond to my codes." "Break it down," suggested. "These doors are designed to stop explosions," said through the swarm. "Even strength cannot break them." "Then we're trapped," whispered. His face was pale behind his glasses. More information came through the announcement system. The hostile vessels had been identified. They belonged to The name sent a wave of terror through the classroom. Every species in the galaxy knew about They were reptilian creatures, covered in thick scales and natural armor. They stood over 2 meters tall, with claws that could tear through metal and teeth that could crush bone. They were slavers, raiders, and hunters. They traveled the galaxy taking young beings from vulnerable locations. An academy full of children from wealthy and important families was exactly the kind of target they loved. "How long until they reach us?" asked. For the first time her voice was not proud, it was afraid. Had managed to access the station's information network through his personal device. His hands were shaking as he read the data. "The boarding pods will reach the station in approximately 12 minutes. Security forces are responding, but—" he swallowed hard. "But our wing of the station is listed as low priority. Help might not reach us in time." 12 minutes, repeated. "What can we do in 12 minutes?" Arguments began immediately. Everyone had a different idea. Wanted to barricade the doors and prepare to fight. They were strong, she argued. They could hold off the attackers until help arrived. Wanted to find another way out. The swarm could fit through the ventilation shafts. Perhaps they could escape and bring help. The glassmen wanted to hide. They suggested everyone find somewhere to conceal themselves and hope to pass them by. Sided with, "We can't just sit here and wait to be taken. We have to do something." "Do what?" demanded. "They are professional warriors. They have weapons. They have armor. What do we have? Desks and data pads." The argument grew louder. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. The fear in the room was becoming panic, and panic was making everyone stupid. Watched it all. She had her notebook open to the page showing the classroom layout. Her eyes moved from the page to the room and back again. She was thinking. They were coming. They would expect certain things. They would expect children to hide or to make clumsy attempts at defense. They would expect fear and chaos. They had done this many times before. They had tactics that worked. But had studied tactics too. She had read about human military history. She had read about ambushes and traps. She had read about how small groups of humans had defeated much larger and stronger enemies by being clever instead of strong. The classroom around her was not just a room. It was a collection of resources, chemicals in the storage cabinet, electrical systems in the walls, floor panels that could be accessed, lighting controls that could be changed, fire suppression systems that could be triggered. Separately, these things were nothing. Together, they could be something else entirely. Stood up. The movement was so unexpected that the arguing students fell silent. They turned to look at the small human girl who had risen from her corner seat. The ghost of Class 9C had suddenly become visible. "They'll expect barricades," said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "They'll expect runners. They won't expect an empty classroom." Made a confused sound. "What are you talking about, human?" "I'm talking about a trap," replied. "They think they're hunting children. They think this will be easy. They're not expecting a fight, not a real one. And they're definitely not expecting us to be ready for them." "Ready?" asked. "How can we be ready? We have nothing." Held up her notebook. "We have everything. We just need to use it correctly." For the first time, her classmates really looked at her. They saw the calm in her eyes. They saw the way she held herself, straight and steady while everyone else trembled. They saw something they had never noticed before. Was not afraid, she was thinking. "I don't understand," admitted. "Explain." Looked at the door. They would come through there. They would come expecting scared children huddled in corners. They would come confident and careless, and would make them regret it. "I'll explain," she said, "but we don't have much time. Everyone needs to listen carefully and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" The students looked at each other. They were scared and confused, but they were also out of options. The strongest among them had no plan. The among them had no ideas. And the quiet human girl in the corner was offering them hope. One by one, they nodded. "Good," said. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook. "Let's get to work." Outside the classroom, in the cold darkness of space, the boarding pods were getting closer. The warriors inside were checking their weapons and planning their attack. They had done this 100 times before. They knew exactly how it would go. They had no idea that everything was about to change. Moved through the classroom like she had practiced this moment 1,000 times in her head. Maybe she had. All those hours of watching, all those pages of notes, all those quiet observations were finally going to mean something. 10 minutes. That was all the time they had before they arrived. Said, pointing to the lab storage closet at the back of the room. "There are emergency foam canisters in there. The orange ones. Bring me all of them." Her brother didn't question her. He ran to the closet and started pulling out the heavy canisters. Emergency foam was used for sealing hull breaches. When sprayed, it hardened quickly into a thick, sticky substance that was almost impossible to remove. Continued, "I need you to access the corridor cameras. Can you do that?" Pushed his glasses up his nose. "I think so. The emergency lockdown might have limited my access, but I can try." "Try hard. I need you to loop the footage. Make it show an empty hallway outside our door. Then I need you to change our classroom's camera feed. Make it show all of us huddled in the back corner, scared and helpless." "Why would we want that?" asked the swarm, clustering together in confusion. "Because they will check the cameras before they enter. They always do. They want to see where their prey is hiding. If they think we're all crammed together in one spot, that's where they'll focus their attention. They won't expect an ambush." Understanding began to spread across the alien faces. Even nodded slowly. "That's clever," admitted. "But what's the ambush? We still don't have weapons." Walked to the center of the room and crouched down. She pressed her fingers against the floor panel. "These can be opened, right? For maintenance access." "Yes," instructor said. "The is beneath us. It's used for cables and pipes." "Perfect. I need you and the other to loosen these specific floor panels." Pointed to a section near the door. "Don't remove them. Just make them weak enough to break when enough weight stands on them." "You want the floor to collapse under the," said. "Exactly, but not all of them, just the ones in the front. It will split their group and create confusion." Stood and walked to the chemical storage cabinet. She read the labels carefully, even though she already knew what was inside. She had memorized the contents weeks ago. She said, "Your species produces a bioluminescent spray when threatened, the bright flash that blinds predators. Is that correct?" The swarm clicked. "Yes, it is an instinctive response. We use it when we are in danger." "Can you control it? Can you release it on command?" There was a pause. The swarm consulted itself. "It would be difficult, but yes, we believe we can." "Good. You're going to hide in the ceiling tiles above the door. When I give the signal, I need you to drop down and spray directly into the faces. Don't try to fight them. Just blind them and get out of the way." "The ceiling tiles," sounded uncertain. "We will be directly above the enemy." "That's why it will work. They won't expect an attack from above, and your spray will overload their thermal vision. See heat. A sudden bright flash will leave them blind for several seconds." Moved on, giving instructions to each group. The glassmen would position themselves near the windows, ready to create distracting reflections with their crystalline bodies. They, with their quick movements, would operate the emergency foam canisters. The students would help seal the fallen in the "What about the chemicals?" asked. He had returned with 6 foam canisters. Pulled 3 containers from the storage cabinet. "These are cleaning compounds. Separately, they're harmless, but when mixed, they create a gas that's very unpleasant for sulfur breathers." "Breathe sulfur," said, looking up from his hacking. "Yes, the gas won't kill them, but it will make them weak and dizzy. We just need to get them to fire their weapons at the right spot. The heat from plasma bolts will trigger the chemical reaction." "Wait," said, "you want them to shoot at us?" "No, I want them to shoot at where they think we are. That's why is creating fake camera footage. They will aim at the corner where they think we're hiding. We won't be there, but the chemicals will." The classroom was transforming. Students who had been paralyzed with fear were now moving with purpose. They were loosening floor panels. They were climbing into the ceiling. Was typing furiously, creating the false camera feeds. Was positioning the foam canisters at key points around the room. "What about us?" asked his sister. "Where do we stand?" Had already marked safe zones on the floor with small pieces of tape. "Here, here, and here. These spots are out of the line of fire and away from the areas that will collapse. When the attack begins, everyone needs to be completely flat against the walls." "You've thought of everything," instructor said. This voice was filled with wonder. "Humans don't have claws," replied. "We don't have armor. We don't have hive minds or crystal skin. On our home planet, we were surrounded by creatures that could kill us easily. So we learned to think. We learned to plan. We learned to turn our environment into our weapon." She looked around the room. These aliens had always seen humans as weak. They had mocked attempts to compete. They had ignored technical skills. They had dismissed as invisible. But weakness had forced humans to become creative. Failure had forced them to become smart. Being overlooked had given them the greatest weapon of all, the element of surprise. "They have conquered hundreds of species," said, "but they've never fought humans before. Not really. Today, they're going to learn why that was a mistake." The final minutes passed quickly. Everyone took their positions. The classroom looked almost normal, except for the subtle signs of the trap. The slightly raised floor panels, the ceiling tiles that were not quite closed, the containers of chemicals placed in the exact right spots. Finished his work. Camera loop is active. Anyone watching will see an empty corridor and a room full of scared students in the corner. Nodded, everyone knows what to do. Heads nodded around the room. Scared heads, uncertain heads, but also determined heads. They were not just waiting to be saved anymore. They were going to save themselves. The station shook slightly. A distant boom echoed through the halls. "The boarding pods have attached," said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "They're inside the station." Took her position against the wall. She pressed her back flat against the metal surface. Beside her was tense and ready. Across the room and the other were coiled like springs. In the ceiling, the swarm waited silently. Footsteps approached, heavy footsteps, the sound of clawed feet on metal floors. They were coming. Closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, all the fear was gone. There was only focus. "Get ready," she whispered. The door began to open. They came through the door like death itself. 12 warriors entered the classroom in perfect formation. They were everything the stories said and more. Each one stood over 2 meters tall, covered in dark green scales that looked like natural armor. Their eyes glowed yellow with thermal vision, and their long tails swept behind them as they moved. They carried plasma rifles, the kind that could burn through steel. Neural stun grenades hung from their belts. Their leader was the largest of them, a veteran with one eye missing and replaced by a mechanical implant. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. His scanner showed 20 heat signatures clustered in the back corner of the room. Easy prey, young students huddled together in fear. This would take less than a minute. "Forward," the leader growled in the tongue. "Stun them all. The younger ones are worth more." The warriors advanced into the classroom. Their clawed feet clicked against the floor. Their eyes scanned for any sign of resistance. They found none. The room appeared empty except for the group of children pressed against the far wall. The first warrior stepped onto the weakened floor panel. He didn't notice the slight give beneath his weight. He was too focused on the targets ahead. His fellow warriors followed, spreading out to surround the prey. 6 were now standing on the prepared section of floor. The leader was just behind them, still near the door. In the shadows of the safe zone, watched. Her eyes moved from warrior to warrior, counting positions, tracking movements. She had one chance. If her timing was wrong, even by a second, everything would fail. The lead warrior raised his weapon, preparing to fire a stun blast at the huddled figures. Now whispered, "Killed the lights." The classroom plunged into complete darkness. The yellow eyes flared brighter, switching fully to thermal vision. For a moment, they could see everything in shades of heat. Then the dropped from the ceiling, and the swarm fell directly onto the faces of the front warriors, their small bodies releasing their natural defense in a massive burst. The bioluminescent spray was like liquid fire to thermal vision. Pure, blinding light exploded across the eyes. The warriors screamed. They stumbled backward, clawing at their faces. The careful formation broke apart in an instant. "Attack," the leader roared. "We're under attack." But he couldn't see. None of them could see. The spray had overloaded their thermal vision completely. Hit the emergency foam canisters. The quick-hardening compound sprayed from 3 directions at once. It hit the weapons first, clogging the barrels and jamming the triggers. Then it hit their legs, gluing their feet to the floor. Warriors tried to move and found themselves stuck, their claws caught in rapidly hardening foam. The floor shouted, "Now!" And 3 other students slammed their combined weight against the weakened panels. The floor section collapsed with a tremendous crash. 6 warriors, blinded and stuck in foam, dropped into the maintenance below. Their screams echoed up through the hole. The remaining warriors fired blindly. Plasma bolts shot across the classroom, bright orange streaks in the darkness, but had planned for this. The students were flat against the walls in the safe zone she had marked. The bolts passed through empty air, and the chemical containers. The heat from the plasma bolts did exactly what it predicted. The cleaning compounds mixed and reacted, releasing a thick cloud of gas. It spread quickly through the room, invisible in the darkness but devastating to sulfur-breathing lungs. The leader took one breath and choked. His warriors coughed and gasped, their scales no protection against the gas that was burning their respiratory systems from the inside. They were strong, but they were also suffocating. "Retreat," the leader tried to order, but his voice was weak. The gas was making him dizzy, confused. He stumbled toward the door. "Intercepted him." The girl moved like lightning, 4 arms swinging in a coordinated attack. She couldn't have beaten a healthy warrior, but this one was blind, choking, and disoriented. Her first blow knocked the rifle from his hands. Her second sent him crashing to the floor. The other students followed her lead. They used their speed to trip the staggering warriors. The glassmen created blinding reflections with what little light remained. Even the students joined in, their soft bodies wrapping around limbs and holding them in place. It was chaos, beautiful planned chaos. Moved through the darkness like a ghost. She had memorized every position, every obstacle. While the others fought, she collected the fallen weapons, kicking them away from grasping claws. She grabbed the neural stun grenades from the leader's belt and tossed them too. "Use them," she called. Didn't hesitate. He pulled the pins and threw the grenades into the hole where the 6 fallen warriors were trying to climb back up. The flash of energy was followed by silence as the neural stun did its work. The remaining warriors in the classroom were finished moments later. The gas had weakened them too much. The students, working together, brought them down one by one. 47 seconds. That's how long it took from the moment the lights went out to the moment the last fell. Turn the lights back on. The classroom was a mess. Foam covered large sections of the floor. The hole in the center gaped open like a wound. Gas still hung in the air, though it was dispersing quickly. And scattered across the room were 12 unconscious warriors, defeated by the very children they had come to capture. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The students stared at what they had done. They stared at each other. They stared at the small human girl who stood in the center of the chaos, calm as ever. Was the first to break the silence. He let out a laugh that was half relief and half disbelief. We did it. We actually did it. We did it, repeated. The looked at her 4 hands still trembling from the fight. How did we do it? Walked to the classroom door and looked out into the corridor. It was empty. The other on the station would have heard the fighting. They would come to investigate eventually. But for now, for this moment, they were safe. We worked together, said simply. That's how we did it. Swarm reformed, the small insects clustering on the ceiling. The human planned everything. We just followed instructions. That's not true, replied. I made a plan, but you all made it work. Strength broke the floor, spray blinded them. Hacking fooled their scouts. Everyone played their part. She turned back to face the classroom. Her classmates were looking at her differently now. Not like she was a ghost. Not like she was invisible. They were looking at her like she was someone important. We should secure the prisoners, said, and contact station security. The fight isn't over yet. Right, said, moving to help. Right, let's finish this. The students got to work, tying up the unconscious with cables from the maintenance. Managed to get a message through to station security, informing them that Classroom 9C had neutralized a strike team. The response from security was disbelief, then shock, then a promise to send backup immediately. Outside the classroom windows, the stars continued to shine. Somewhere out there, the rest of the fleet was realizing that something had gone very wrong with their raid. The easy target had become a disaster. The children had fought back. And they had won. The rescue teams arrived 20 minutes later. They came expecting to find a classroom of terrified hostages, or worse, empty seats where captured students had once been. Instead, they found 20 young beings standing guard over 12 bound and unconscious warriors. The security officers didn't believe it at first. They checked the prisoners, then checked them again. They examined the battlefield, noting the collapsed floor, the hardened foam, the scattered weapons. They interviewed the students one by one, hearing the same impossible story over and over. A human girl had organized the defense. A human girl had turned a classroom into a trap. A human girl had led them to victory. The news spread across Station Orion 7 within hours. By the next day, it had reached the Galactic Network. Within a week, the story of Class 9C was being told on 100 different worlds. But for the days after the attack passed in a strange blur. There were medical examinations, counseling sessions, and endless questions from officials who couldn't understand what had happened. Through it all, she remained quiet and calm, answering when asked but never seeking attention. The Galactic Council summoned her to testify. It was the highest authority in known space, made up of representatives from every major species. They met in a massive chamber filled with floating platforms, each one holding delegates from a different world. Stood on the central platform, small and alone, facing beings who controlled the fates of trillions. Translator devices hummed as her words were converted into hundreds of languages. Explain to this council, the representative demanded, how a group of academy students defeated a professional strike team. This should not have been possible. Looked up at the towering alien. She thought about all the times had laughed at human weakness. She thought about all the times her classmates had dismissed her as invisible. She thought about her notebook, filled with observations that nobody had ever bothered to read. Humans don't have natural weapons, she said. Her voice was steady, reaching every corner of the vast chamber. "We don't have armor or claws or venom. On our home planet, we were surrounded by creatures that could kill us easily. So we learned to adapt. We learned to think. We learned to turn everything around us into a tool for survival." "A chair can be a weapon," she continued. "A chemical can be poison. A floor tile can be a trap. Humans see patterns that others don't see. We notice details that others ignore. We do this because for our entire evolutionary history, missing a pattern meant death." The chamber was silent. The representatives leaned forward, listening to this small creature explain the secret of her species. They expected scared children. They expected victims. They had never fought humans before, not really. They didn't know that we have survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They didn't know that our ancestors hunted creatures much larger and stronger than themselves. They didn't know that giving up is not in our nature. The representative clicked rapidly. "You are saying that human weakness is actually strength." "I'm saying that what you call weakness forced us to become strong in ways you don't expect. We cannot win a fair fight against most species. So we don't fight fair. We plan. We prepare. We use every advantage we can find. And we never ever stop trying." A murmur ran through the council. The representatives exchanged glances, seeing the human species in a new light. One platform held a single human figure. Admiral was old, with silver hair and a face lined by decades of service. She was the only human on the council, and she had been silent throughout the testimony. Now she smiled. She recognized what she was seeing. This girl, this quiet student who drew maps in her notebook and watched while others ignored her, was a reminder of why humanity had survived. "Thank you for your testimony," the council speaker said. "This matter will be discussed further. You may return to the academy." Bowed slightly and left the chamber. Behind her, the debates were already beginning. What did this mean for human status in the galaxy? How should species reassess their understanding of the small, soft beings from Earth? But didn't care about politics or status. She just wanted to go home. The academy welcomed her as a hero. Students from other classes gathered to see her when she walked through the hallways. Teachers spoke her name with respect. Even the species that had always looked down on humans now moved aside when she passed. Was waiting by the door of Class 9C, the girl looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for someone so proud. "I wanted to apologize," said, her 4 hands twisted together nervously. "I said humans were weak. I said you couldn't contribute. I was wrong." Nodded, "You were wrong, but you also fought beside me when it mattered. That counts for something." "I'd fight beside you again," said. "Any time, I mean that." Swarm appeared, clustering on the wall nearby. "We all would. The swarm has discussed this. You are not just a human to us anymore. You are our friend." Similar conversations happened throughout the day. Students who had never spoken to her before wanted to sit with her at lunch. Students who had called her the ghost now knew her name. The invisible girl had become impossible to ignore. But some things didn't change. At the end of the day, returned to her corner seat. She pulled out a fresh notebook and began to draw. This time, she was mapping the security improvements that had been made to the station, just in case. Slid into the seat next to her. "You know, you could enjoy being famous for a while. You don't have to go right back to planning." "Being famous is temporary," replied. "Being prepared lasts forever." Her brother laughed. "You're something else, little sister." Joined them, pushing his glasses up his nose. "The recordings from the attack have been viewed over 1 billion times on the Galactic Network. Someone turned it into a training video for security forces." Looked up from her notebook. "Really? Really? They're calling it the Orion Trap. Military academies across the galaxy are studying what you did." For a moment, something crossed his face. Not pride exactly, but a quiet satisfaction. She had wanted to prove that humans belonged among the stars. She hadn't expected to prove it quite so dramatically. "Good," she said finally. "Maybe next time they won't underestimate us." Across the galaxy, the High Command received the combat recordings from the failed raid. They watched in silence as their elite warriors were defeated by children. They analyzed every moment of the trap, trying to understand how it had happened. When the analysis was complete, they added a new entry to their invasion protocols. It was a classification they had never used before. Sol 3 designated Earth. Native species, human, threat assessment, extreme. Combat approach, avoid if possible. Note, they do not fight like warriors, they fight like survivors. Every environment becomes their weapon. Every defeat becomes their lesson. Do not engage. The message spread through command channels. Soon, other species learned of it. The warning about humans became a whispered legend in the darker corners of the galaxy. Back at the academy, finished her drawing. The security map was complete, every detail perfect. She closed her notebook and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, enemies were learning to fear her species. Somewhere out there, beings were realizing that the quiet, soft humans were more dangerous than they appeared. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing. And it had started with a quiet girl in the back of a classroom, watching and waiting and planning. "What are you thinking about?" asked. Smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. "The future," she said. "I'm thinking about the future." The stars continued to shine. The station continued to float in the endless dark. And humanity, once overlooked and underestimated, had taken its first step toward becoming a legend. This was not the end of story. It was only the beginning.